Hey everyone, you are listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast. We are two neurodivergent mental health professionals in a neurotypical world. I'm Patrick Casale.
And I'm Dr. Neff.
And during these episodes, we do talk about sensitive subjects, mental health, and there are some conversations that can certainly feel a bit overwhelming. So we do just want to use that disclosure and disclaimer before jumping in. And thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. Megan Anna here. So right now it is March 7th of 2025. Patrick and I have been taking our yearly break from the podcast, and we have been working to record new episodes. But to be completely honest with you, we've been struggling a bit. We have recorded two. One of them we opted to not release. I am personally struggling to know how to talk in a metabolized way about the cultural moment that we are in. And one of the core values of the work I do is I really want to work to be releasing metabolized emotions into the world and not to be projecting more fear and anger and uncertainty. And so in recording this podcast, it is really important to me that I'm doing so from a grounded place. And so right now, we have decided to extend our break by a few episodes. If you've also been following my work at Neurodivergent Insights, you know that I've had some pretty destabilizing things happening in my business that also make it quite hard to, in this moment, want to be perceived. And I'm also spending a lot of time to stabilize my business so that I can continue to support my family and the neurodivergent employees I have. And that has all made it hard for me personally to record episodes in the kind of way that I would want to be releasing emotions and thoughts into the world. We are planning to return, and we will return. We are just extending our break. And so we will continue to re-release some of our favorite episodes from the last year. And we thank you so much for the support of this community. I've been thinking a lot about community this year. I think community really matters. I think belonging and deepening the communities that we have really matters. And I'm putting a lot of thought into how the work I do can lean into that over this next year. And we both really want the podcast to also be an extension of that kind of energy. And so that is why we're taking a little bit more of a pause than we anticipated, but we look forward to returning and continuing the conversation in a metabolized way. Bye for now.
Welcome to Divergent Conversations. Megan and I have been talking a lot off screen about some of the chronic health struggles that we both experienced, that we're both experiencing, some of the frustrations and just the kind of unrelenting things that seem to pop up symptomology wise. And we're going to do something kind of unique today. Megan pitched the idea of kind of looking at this from like a biopsychosocial model and creating some Venn diagrams and then holding ourselves accountable to the suggestions that we throw out to each other. And hopefully that also means that it doesn't make this episode doom and gloom and depressing the entire time.
And I totally realized this after we were texting about it this morning of like, what should we talk about today? And then we decided to do this mini series. And what I realized is like, oh my gosh, we're like ADHD interest nervous systeming it. And part of the motivation for this, my spouse actually mentioned in our romantification episode on ADHD, how like we both said something like, you know, I know if I did this for a month, I'd feel so much better, but I don't do it. Like for me, it was movement. I know if I walk. And realizing that to get myself to do some of these things, I have to like turn it into a thing. So I think I love journalists and writers and documentary people who make themselves the experiment and are like, I'm going to do this experiment and I'm going to document it and I'm going to reflect on it and I'm going to then like circle back. So I realize I think what we're doing is we're just turning things that we want to do into something challenging and fun and interesting by making a podcast series out of it.
Yeah, I think that feels on brand. Because if we don't do that, what are the odds that we're going to follow through with these recommendations or suggestions?
Zero. Like, I know all of the things I should be doing. I could like conceptualize my biopsychosocial. I think I will in a future episode. I could say these are all the things that would help you if you start doing them. I know all of the things, but doing them, that's a whole like that's where the challenge is in doing them. So I like the idea of making ourselves public guinea pigs
Yeah,
to get ourselves to actually do the things.
I agree. Because if I just say it out loud, that's not enough. And you're right.
Mhm.
Like rationally, I know what I'm supposed to be doing for the most part. There's some things that feel out of control, but I know what I should be doing to get some of this stuff more manageable. And sometimes it's just so freaking hard. If we're going to talk about my situation, my sleep, especially today, the lack of sleep then plays a role in the ability to do any of the things that are actually going to support you to sleep better. So it's like
Yeah.
this unrelenting, self-fulfilling prophecy situation.
Absolutely. And that's what we would see. And so I worked in behavioral health for a while. Most of my training and my doctoral program was doing internships in hospitals. And most of the complex, behavioral health providers get a lot of the complex medical patients. And usually it is exactly this. It's this spiral. And it's like, well, there's pain and then I can't sleep. And then on top of that, like behavioral and cognitive factors layer on top of like biological, physiological factors. And I kind of think of it, the metaphor that popped in my head this morning is the cognitive and the behavioral stuff. It's like wet cement and it almost like locks you in then into like this trap of whether it's sleep issues or fatigue or all these other things. So then you get trapped in a spirally cycle that's both, it's got biological components for sure, but then it also has cognitive and behavioral elements to it. And then it typically pulls in social factors. And this becomes a cycle that can feel really helpless. It can feel really hard to get out of. I know, especially when my chronic pain was at its peak, I was like, I can map out my cycle of like pain, substance use, sleep, like, but it was so hard to break out of it, even though I can map it out. Oh,
Yeah.
the
So
cement.
yeah, it feels like that's good imagery because I think that's exactly what it feels like. And you're right. There's this helplessness that comes up where it's like, I've tried all the things, but everything's compounding, everything's layered, everything's building on itself. In order to get to this outcome, I have to like swim or wade through all of this stuff that feels really murky. And how can I do that if I can only get through like one of those things in a day, let alone six or seven?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's interesting. We recorded an episode recently on values and ADHD business. And I think we both said autonomy was our number one value. After we recorded that episode, I was thinking more on it. And I was like, I think the value, my number one value, is actually agency. And I think that's something that I've really struggled to have. And I think for many reasons, I'm a lot more impulsive than I think I lead with. I actually think I try to hide that quite a bit, but I'm often like at the mercy of my impulses. I have a lot of executive functioning challenges. So agency, my whole life has been incredibly hard. And that's I've been holding that as a mantra of like, I like thinking about that, like, are you moving away or toward this core value? Like, I'm thinking about that every day of like, does this decision move me toward having more agency in my life or toward helplessness? Because I think helplessness is the opposite of agency. So it's something I'm really working with a lot of intention to cultivate.
That makes a lot of sense. I think I like the way you just kind of portrayed that because I experience a lot of that too. And I think this values aligned perspective that we've been introducing and obviously are well aware that this is a big part of our lives plays a lot of roles in our decisions. The more I stray from my values, the more I feel pulled away from them, especially when it comes from like a medical standpoint and it impacts my ability to be values aligned because I'm having to make decisions based on constantly treading water, so to speak. It's really challenging.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of what makes things like depression and fatigue so depressing or pain, is it makes it harder to be value aligned in how we live. And our quality of life tends to go way down when we're not value aligned. So like living a value aligned life, there's lots of research about how that's protective for our mental health and our wellness and our quality of life. So when we are struggling to do that because of some of these situational factors, again, that often activates that downward spiral.
So what do we do? That's the big question.
Yeah. So, and I think that was part of it, is because we were talking today of like, do we do another episode on health? Because we're both really like in it with our health stuff. And that's where it's like, well, if we do that, let's like do something about it. Let's not just complain about it. And so the framework we're going to use that we talked about is kind of the biopsychosocial model, and we're going to like behavioral health ourselves. So the biopsychosocial framework, it's a framework that's used in a lot of kind of holistic programs, or like specifically behavioral health, which is behavioral health is often, it can be a social worker or a psychologist, typically either a psychologist or a social worker in a healthcare setting, who is helping people to kind of work with all of the factors of their complex medical condition. So the framework is that whenever we have a complex illness, there are biological factors, right? So those innate physiological factors. There's psychological factors. So that can be kind of a lot of the, if there's a co-occurring mental health condition, that for sure, but also just how we're talking to ourselves, mindset, that sort of stuff. And then social factors as well. So I like to map out, and this is something I used to do with my patients, or I would at least do in my own conceptualization, map out what are the biological, psychological, and social factors that are contributing to this person's problem. You also want to look at what are the factors that could help this person to kind of reverse this spiral. And I like it because it's really holistic and it makes it concrete. So part of the helpless cycle I know that I experience is it feels so big, it feels so overwhelming. You don't know where to start. And so by breaking it down, it gives you anchor points of like, okay, well, here's one thing you could do within this one domain to push the needle more toward wellness than illness.
Yeah, I love that. And I love looking at it holistically, so it doesn't just feel like it's just this medical, like big thing that I don't have any power or control over. Like there are things that I actually can influence here and at least manage and make symptom alleviation a little bit easier.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the other thing about this framework, sometimes when someone's experiencing a medical condition, it'll be common for a provider to say, well, have you talked to a therapist, or have you like considered mental health? And often it's sad because often the way it's communicated, and sometimes what the provider does mean is like, we can't find anything biological here, so we should start considering kind of psychological components. What's unfortunate, the message the patient often feels, I felt this myself as a patient, is it's in your head. Go fix your head. Yep. And the reality is that medical conditions are complex. Like I said at the beginning of the talk, there's often biological factors that start, but then behavioral, so our behavior, and then our cognitive factors, how we think about it, layers on top of that. And that's part of what gets us stuck in cycles. So anyone with a complex medical condition, I think, would benefit from working from a really holistic framework. But we often feel like, I don't want that because that's the dismissive route. That's when the doctors have given up on me, is when I go to the behavioral health provider. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, there's a lot outside of our control. We both have bodies that just suck. That's out of our control. But let's, instead of just having more and more episodes where we complain about it, let's focus on the parts that are in our control and then treat ourselves as guinea pigs.
Exactly. And I think the psychosomatic component, right? If we can take these little steps and incorporate little pieces of skill, strategy, education, etc., maybe it doesn't fix the problem. Maybe it doesn't completely absolve us from the problem or the issue. 'However, maybe it makes our mindset feel a little bit better about approaching it. And maybe it makes our mindset feel a little bit better about approaching it. and managing it, opposed to just feeling like bleak and utter hopelessness.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that like agency, self-efficacy, that's another study that they've looked at with folks with chronic pain, chronic medical conditions, is self-efficacy. Like there's scales for it. How much self-efficacy does the person have? Which is really the sense of like the belief I have the power to do things that have an impact in my life. And that consistently is such a strong measure of like patient outcome and overall well-being. And so maybe we can implement a behavioral change, and maybe it pushes the needle a little bit in our symptoms. But if it pushes the needle in our self-efficacy, then that in and of itself is a significant outcome.
100%. Absolutely.
Okay, so let's cultivate self-efficacy for you and me.
Okay.
Or at least try.
Yeah, we're going to try. And that's all we want
Okay.
you to do at home too. We just want you to try.
Um, okay, I feel like I just talked a lot about like framework, the model. Like, do you have any questions about like health psychology or biopsychosocial stuff or
No,
this
I'm
framework?
a firm believer in looking at the holistic picture instead of just medical model versus behavioral health model. I think, we still see a lot of that in the medical community where it's like one or the other, when obviously we know medical or physical health impacts mental health, vice versa. And there's other factors at play. So I think it's just acknowledging like this is a holistic viewpoint. That's really an ideal perspective when we're looking at any sort of complex situation, whether it be a mental health condition or symptoms, physical health or symptoms. Sometimes it's societal. Sometimes it's like just a part of our daily living experience. So everything plays a role. Everything plays into it. And picking that apart is really important. And I think it gives you a little bit more optimism as well, instead of saying this is the only thing you can try or you're basically screwed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also, of course, love it because it's visual, because it's a diagram. And
You love Venn diagrams.
I love Venn diagrams. I do. Um, yeah.
If
And I
you
love
know, you're not-
conceptualization.
yeah, and you're very good at it. And I bet you, from it, I know you don't want to be perceived. If someone was like, what does Megan Neff, like Dr. Neff, do really well? I bet Venn diagram would be in the top 3 that would come up as like a random Family Feud-esque type poll of like, how many of the audience members said Venn diagrams? Like 60 out of 100, because they're so helpful. So
Okay. Enough of me being perceived.
enough of Megan. Okay.
Topic change.
So which of our many complex chronic health conditions do we want to talk about? For me,
So,
it's this.
and that's actually a really good point, Patrick, is that often it is helpful to like zoom in on one tangible goal. So like sleep. I think that's a really good one, because it could be overwhelming if it's like sleep and this and this and this and this. Um, for me, it's going to be fatigue / depression. And I say / depression because I think with fatigue, it really is tricky to know, because when you're depressed, it's kind of like it shuts down the system and you have more fatigue.
Yep.
And then as we've talked about, like I know when I'm fatigued or sick, it makes it hard to do the things that give my life meaning or to be productive, or to even find my interest interesting. And that's depressing. So it's like an chicken or egg scenario. But I think the fatigue definitely has some physiological basis, but I'm going to clump those together and that'll be my target.
Okay. That sounds good. And you're right. I think zooming in when we're talking about people who have a lot of different things going on, as so many of us do, it feels a little bit more manageable instead of like listing and this and this and this and this. Because even when I'm at the doctor and they're like, so tell me what's going on with you, I'm like, I don't know where to start. Like, where do you want me to tell you? So it does break it down into smaller, more digestible chunks too.
There's a metaphor from Jonathan Dalton, Dr. Jonathan Dalton, I really like. It's when he was doing the anxiety masterclass with me. And he's a specialist in anxiety, but he also talks a lot about autism. And he uses this metaphor of the school of fish So one of the reasons a school of fish will swim together is it's a lot harder for like a shark or a predator to bite into a school of fish than an individual fish, because it like doesn't know where essentially to like bite into. I realize this is a cruel metaphor, but that's for a lot of autistic people are processing without bottom up processing. And I think ADHDers, because of executive functioning, probably also experience this. It's like a lot of decisions feel like that pool of fish or that school of fish, school of fish. Um, and we don't know where to bite into it. And so
Right.
we don't know where to start. And that's, again, is something that impacts self-efficacy. And I think the combination of our processing style plus our health conditions, it often feels like I'm just trying to bite into a school of fish. I don't eat fish, but metaphorically.
No, that makes a lot of sense because it feels so big and so hard to conceptualize or even explain, or where to start, or how to approach. What do you start with first? And it just becomes so complex and overwhelming that I think my instinct, at least, is to just shut down and be like, I'm just not going to pursue treatment because this feels hopeless.
I'm so embarrassed to admit this with the knowledge I have, but that's been my approach. Like I'm really medically avoidant. I should be working with a medical team given everything I'm dealing with, but partly it's the hopelessness that they'll understand me, and then partly it's the I'm so overwhelmed by all the things I want to even know where to start.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I told you like offline about my experience with that sleep doctor last week. And those are the types of experiences that do make you just want to be like, wave the white flag, like give up.
hmm
Like, what is the point?
yeah.
Uh, so,
Unless you can find a 𝗿𝗶𝘀𝘀𝘁𝗍, it's like, what's the point?
yeah. Yeah. Shout it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Dr. Hauser, like, if you could become available in all 50 states, that would be really
to all the
fantastic.
humans.
Yeah. All of our neurodivergent humans that need neuro-inclusive healthcare and really great understanding and affirming quality health education. So
Mhm.
please get licensed outside of Vermont if you're listening to this. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness. How much would you pay to have 𝗿𝗂𝘍𝑒𝑟 be your provider? Okay, that's a bad question.
Whatever it takes. Whatever
But
it takes.
yeah, no, I was saying that to my spouse the other day. It was a really low energy day. And I was like, if they made energy in a bottle, like real energy, not like caffeine, I was like, I would pay an ungodly amount for that.
Yep. I can
Um,
super relate to that. Yep. And
yeah.
and going back to what you were saying about like chronic fatigue slash depression, like one in the same, right? That's the same for me with like chronic insomnia slash fatigue slash depression, because like they all are in the same like bicycle spoke, so to speak, and they're
Yeah.
all playing a role into each other.
Mhm.
Don't sleep for whatever reason, or wake up and not be able to fall back asleep. Next day, you're going to be fatigued. All of a sudden, you're depressed. Now, the littler tasks in life become so much more unmanageable. Now, instead of being quote unquote productive, you lay on the couch all day and watch TV because that's all you can do. That is so much of my day to day and my reality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these all spiral into each other, which I think when we do our conceptualizations, we'll flesh out a bit.
Yep.
Because yeah, absolutely. And then it's just a matter of finding like, okay, where's the place where I reach in and I switch the cycle around? Like what are the anchor points? I like to think about it. What are the anchor points where like that's something concrete I can grab, I can do it differently, and it
Yeah.
can shift the cycle.
So for you, chronic fatigue slash depression, what are the anchor points for that for you?
Um, the ones think I will be focusing on are movement and diet. Because I think I have a lot of inflammation. I've It's been interesting. Part of my unmasking was, I think, getting like having less food rules, which on one hand I think was really good for me, but then on the other hand, I think has contributed to some health things. And I have so many complex feelings around this because like um food is such a complex topic, and like especially when you throw in neurodivergence and like safe foods and eating disorders, and like it's complex. Um And part of masking for me was having a tighter rein. I don't know if it's masking, but there was a really like harsh, fierce, um, kind of driver in me that had a lot of rules. And then when I started unmasking, the rules started going away. And part of that for me was my rules around health started going away. So like for a long time, I didn't do sugar and gluten. And then so things like that, where it's like now I want to come at it at a place not from like this harsh rule maker, but a place of agency of I want to do things that are good for my body. Because I can tell my body is impacted by like I probably have a sugar addiction. Like I am very I know how terrible sugar is on the body and inflammation and adrenals. So things like that. I want to focus on diet changes, nutrition changes, and incorporating movement would be my two anchors.
Okay. I think mine for my sleep would be movement / exercise or activity. I noticed I live a very sedentary lifestyle, whether it's sitting here, whether it's sitting on my couch, and having all these soccer injuries pile up. I can't be as active as I would like to be. But I've also realized if I'm just sitting around the house all day, whether it's working or leisurely, I'm not discharging the energy that I have, which is probably going to impact me later at night when I feel more restless or I feel more unable to fall asleep. So that would be one of my anchors for sure. My other would probably be diet as well. I don't eat unhealthy food, but I do eat like a lot of hot food, a lot of spicy food, um, a lot of carbonated like drinks, especially for like my throat. But I also understand how that impacts sleep, and impacts like how often you have to get up to pee at night, like things like that. So really being a lot more conscientious about things like that I have control over on my day to day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think we've both picked good anchors because we've both picked anchors that we have some control and agency around. So structure of what we're going to do, I think we're going to do an episode where we do the biopsychosocial conceptualization for each of us. I'll probably make notes while we do it, so that might be a good one. Those might be good episodes for people to do on YouTube if they want the visual aid. I don't know. How do you feel about making the visual aid available as a download? I don't know. That's a ton of personal information.
I'm ambivalent. I mean, I don't have a preference whatsoever. I would defer to you.
Maybe after we do it, we can also take our names off of it, but I think the visual would be helpful for listeners. But yeah, we can decide after we do it. And then we'll create really concrete goals, and then record a follow-up episode in like a month.
Yep.
Maybe so the way behavioral health works, like when you're working with a behavioral health patient, you often we'll make goals and then see them 2 to 4 weeks later, check in on those and make new goals. I don't know if we want this to be like an ongoing series where we do that. We could kind of play it by ear, I think.
I think that knowing both of us and how much we do in our lives and how distracted we get, the more accountability measures, the better. So we can play it by ear, but I think that's a good idea to just reassess. Yeah, and I think
people could follow along. Like if we have goals that are similar, people will be like, okay, I'm gonna do this goal for a month.
I imagine a lot of you listening have similar struggles, whether it's with sleep and fatigue and depression. I cannot imagine that you are in the minority at all.
Yeah, probably 80% of our listeners can relate to these struggles. That said, this isn't health advice. This check with your doctors, do all the things. Feel free to experiment on yourself, but this isn't medical advice.
Nope, we're two people talking about this. Nice asterisk.
That was like the most clunky medical disclaimer ever.
By the way, ... This podcast is not medical advice. It's not mental health advice. We're not responsible for whatever decisions you make. Thanks so much.
There you go. Thanks for turning my clunky medical disclosure into a actual one.
So I do think this is a great idea, and we can create some like offline accountability, text each other, whatever we need to do to hold each other accountable and support one another. I think like accountability is a big piece that goes unmissed and unchecked in this, because say you go to your medical provider, your mental health provider, you set these goals, and then you go home to yourself. It's like, how do I keep myself engaged and accountable, right? If I know the only measure is going back in 2 to 4 weeks to talk to this person, if we can create even more layers of accountability in place, I think it's more realistic that we actually follow through with that.
Okay. This is the first time. I know we've talked about like, do we set up a Patreon for our podcast? This is the first time I actually think it could be kind of cool too, because we could like record images or videos of each day and like upload that to a Patreon or whatever membership site we did. This is the first time I'm like, okay, maybe it actually would be worth it to do the legwork to set up a Patreon.
Okay. I mean, totally open to that too. So what we're going to do next episode is the Biopsychosocial, and follow along, play along at home, create your own. Check out Megan's Venn diagrams for a good visual aid, because I think those are super helpful to help you like compartmentalize all of this and conceptualize it. And we will make sure that we find some creative way to figure out how to include these graphics and these downloads, whether it's on our newsletters or the show notes or something like that, or the YouTube channel. So yeah, I know this episode is just kind of talking through this process, but I think that's what we're going to do. And we would love for you to all start this process with us starting next week in next week's episode, and set these goals for yourselves as well.
Okay.
So to everyone listening to the Divergent Conversations podcast, new episodes are out on Fridays on all major platforms and YouTube. Like, download, subscribe, and share. And we will talk about all of this stuff next week.